It is a great honor and a privilege to introduce Milli Horowitz, and your maiden name is Steinberg, and you were born in Holland in 1942.
I was, yes, on the 1st of January 1942 in The Hague, which I don't remember at all. And shortly after that, no, I don't know actually how long after I was born, at some point during the first year of my life, I had apparently dysentery, and the Germans didn't like contagious diseases. They were very scared of them. Anyway, I ended up in hospital, and while I was in hospital I was better, and then I got a mosquito bite on my eye and my eye swelled up. So the doctor there said, oh, you know, Mrs. Steinberg, leave her here for a bit more. She's safe here. So then, while I was recovering from my mosquito bite, there was a nurse, and I've never actually discovered what her name was or the connection, and her parents were living in the same house as my future foster parents, and her parents were collaborators with the Nazis. But she wasn't. She was very anti-German, but her parents were very pro-German. And she, probably from her parents, had heard there was going to be a razzia, which is a raid in that hospital, and she knew I was a Jewish baby. So she told her friends who lived in the same house with her parents, look, there's this Jewish baby, we have to get her out because the Germans are going to do a raid here shortly. So that very same day, an elder sister of my foster mother came and got me out of hospital. And I don't know whether my mother knew them or where I was going or whatever. So they gave me some medicine to keep quiet, and I had no papers, of course. And in those days, under the German occupation, the Germans would ask anybody for their papers, identity all the time. So this future aunt, I suppose, took me by train and from The Hague to Dordrecht, where they lived, and delivered me to Dordrecht. Afterwards, they discovered that my mother's sister, younger sister, had followed her. And so my aunt, my real aunt, always knew where I was, right? But I only discovered that years and years later from a letter that my aunt wrote to Yad Vashem to prove that they had been righteous Gentiles. Anyway, so I got to Dordrecht, and then my foster parents wrapped me in a army blanket and put me on the doorstep. And then in the evening they went to visit her parents, my grandparents, and they found me. Of course they knew they'd put me there, but I don't know if my foster father knew. I don't think he did, but my foster mother knew, and my grandparents and Tom Cobbler and all, they all knew who I was and what I was. And so they found me, and they took me to the nearest police station, and they were both interrogated separately, and they kept to the story. Look, this is a baby, and luckily I was very blonde, and then I still had blue eyes apparently, which turned green eventually. And they kept on saying, look, we just found her, we don't know who she is, what she is, baby, blah, blah, blah. My foster father at that time had become an ambulance driver, and they called his boss, who was a doctor, and the doctor came and examined me and said, well, very healthy baby, obviously Aryan, Irish, because, I was blonde, etc. And she's probably a baby of some Dutch girl and a German soldier, and they didn't want the baby, so they put it on the doorstep. So the next day they put an advertisement, the police put an advertisement in the local newspaper saying foundling, aged about 8 months, dressed in this, that and the other, long blonde curls, blue eyes. Anybody, well of course nobody came to claim me. And then they said to my foster mother, okay, we'll find a nice Aryan home for her, but in the meantime will you keep her? All right, we'll keep her for a bit, till you find this nice Aryan family. So after about a week or so, my foster mother went back to the police and said, look, I've grown quite fond of this baby. Do you mind? We'll keep her. And the police said, yeah, fine, you keep her. That's how I got to them. They never had any children of their own. So that was in January 1943. I was just a year old by then. In the meantime, my father had already been deported. My mother went into hiding with my brother, who was 5 years older than I was, but I don't know the exact date when they went into hiding. Anyway, so they kept me, and after a year, I think, according to the Baptist papers, they had me baptized. Now, I have to say at this point that all my life, I never knew anything about until I met my late partner, who died nearly 2 years ago. When he first met me, he said, there's something very strange about you. I said, oh, thank you. And I said, well, what is it then? He said, well, I think you have pushed away all your emotions all your life. It's like, you have to find out why, and you have to, and by then he knew that I was, hidden child, etc. And he said, we will go and find out. And he literally took me, we did a lot of research online at the time. This was early 1990s, I would think. And via all sorts of people on the internet, we found out that, yes, I did know. The only thing I ever knew about my past was that I had been hidden in Dordrecht and my name was Marjootje Hofstee. That was my identity.
Was that the name of the family?
Yeah, that was the name they had given me.
We have a picture behind you of the family.
Yeah, they were Hofstee Bruinzeel. So that's what they named me. They named me Maria Josefa.
And what were the name of your foster parents?
They were Mary and Wim Hofstee.
And how old are you in this picture?
I think about 18 months, but I'm not sure. It does have a date. No, that was the date of the play. Yeah, I think it was sometime in 1944, and I don't know the occasion, but...
And Millie, do you have any recollections?
No, but I'll tell you what happened. So after all the research that Jacques and I did, we found the twin brother of my late foster father, and he was still alive. And he said, yes, I remember you. I remember my sister-in-law changing your nappies. And then he was called up into the Dutch army and he was sent to Indonesia. And then he never saw me again, I don't suppose. But eventually, through all the research we did, we found the last address of my foster mother with a telephone number. So I rang the number, and it was somewhere in the North Holland, and I got somebody on the phone, and this man said yes. In fact, her lasses, she lived here. What had happened was they were very devout Roman Catholics, but my foster mother eventually had gone to live with the priest. She left her husband and went to live with her Roman Catholic priest, and they're not allowed to marry Roman Catholics priests. Anyway, so that was her last address, and we looked after her because she got ill and old, and we paid for her burial and all the rest of it. But they said at that time we received a thank you letter from a sister of hers, and that sister, I'll give you the phone number. So I looked at the phone number and I thought, that's rather funny, because the sister lived in Roermond, and Roermond was where I grew up after the war, because I recognized the what do you call it, the number that comes before the number.
The area code.
Yeah, the area code, and that was Roermond. I thought, weird. Anyway, so I rang the number, and I got this lady on the phone, and I said, there's this. She said, yes, you're Millie, I know. She says, I've been waiting for this phone call for 60 years. So obviously, Jacques was actually living in Valkenburg, which is not far from Roermond. It's the most southern part of the Netherlands. And we went to see her. And she actually told me the whole story that I've just been telling you, how I got there, how they put me on the doorstep, etc., etc., etc. And she said, we all loved you, and you know, we didn't know what happened to your mother. I'm not even sure they'd ever met my mother at that point. And she said, we didn't know, but we were always trying to prepare you in the case she'd come back. And we were telling you, by then I was 3, that you have a little mother and a big mother. And you know, the Dutch are very, very tall, so that was the big mother, the tall one. And my mother was a little Jewish woman, so she was short. And she said, but we never got a chance. And then one day there was a knock on the door. Your mother walked in, dragged you away. You were screaming, kicking, crying. You didn't know this woman. And she just took you away. And because of that, we never had any contact with her after the war, nor did I. Until the 1990s, when I found this and I found the whole story, I never saw them again. So by then, my foster parents had both died. However, we found her youngest brother, Bim. And her youngest brother was not well, and by the time I got them all recognized as righteous Gentiles, he couldn't come to the ceremony because he was on a kidney machine, right? So he didn't come, but he wrote me this letter. And I'll translate it for you because it's in Dutch. And he wrote, "Dear Madam, it feels really ridiculous to start this letter in such an official manner, but only I don't know how unacceptable you'd think of me to say, Dear Marjootje. In my memory," which is not as good. He was actually a school teacher, apparently, because he said it's not as good as it was because I had 5 slight strokes 2 years ago. But in my memory is still alive this sweet little girl that I proudly recognized as my younger sister. And one day she suddenly disappeared out of my life. And then he goes on to say why they can't come because he's on this kidney machine and blah 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 blah. And he said he remembers me as that he remembers very clearly, regularly, that next door a family moved in with one little boy. And you see, this is very Dutch. I don't know how to translate it. And when he was telling me about the little boy next door, that his name was Jantje Now, I told him in my own very, decided way that it couldn't be Jantje Now, but it had to be Jantje Nu, which is grammatically. I was 3 years old. Apparently I was in those days I was very I don't know the word in English, but in
Dutch
I was very strong-willed.
Mm-hmm.
And his sister, the one that I met eventually, said that I was very intelligent, very strong-willed, but they led my being strong-willed in a sort of nice way. I think they were actually a lovely family. They were my parents, my grandparents, my aunts, my uncles. They were a big family. And he says, I still see the panic in your eyes when one day during a razzia, a German soldier came inside with his weapons, but you were much too small to have any idea about the war or the persecution of Jews. So even less that you knew that you were part of the persecuted group of people. But luckily he was an Austrian who didn't like Germans. He said sorry and that he had to stay in a little bit longer, so-called to search the house, which he didn't. Which was fortunate because there was somebody hidden, i.e. me. So he said, it took me a long time when I was always longing for you, but as a teenager I had other things in my mind, and the only thing that I ever heard about you was that you lived in London. So anyway, so he goes on, and he said, sorry that I typed it, but he said, me as old headmaster, I can't write legible anymore, so that's why I've typed it. Perhaps I'll see you or hear from you. Anyway, we then went to see him, of course, and he says, sorry that this letter has been very unofficial, but I'm just sitting here talking to you with a sweet little girl that lives in my memory.
It's beautiful. And Milli, when you went to see him, it must have been very emotional.
Yes, we went on Chuck, and he died shortly afterwards, actually.
And can I ask, how did you get the picture?
How?
How did you get the picture?
This picture? Yeah. Well, some time ago, quite a few years ago, somebody in Dordrecht found me on the internet somehow and sent me an email and asked me, did I know anything about the Jewish population in Dordrecht? And I said, no, nothing, because all I know, I was hidden there, and by then all the Jews in Dordrecht had been deported. And I told him that I was hidden, and then he said, well, is it okay to write your story, which he did, and it's somewhere on the internet, but it's in Dutch. And I've got bits of it here, but I'm afraid everything is in Dutch, so I won't bother you with it. So he actually, that was the first time that somebody wrote my story, so that is Dordrecht. So then, okay, so my mother came and kidnapped me away from there, and I think they were probably the best years of my life, most normal.
Milli, who gave you the picture?
This man in Dordrecht who wrote the article, he went to all sorts of archives and found lots of pictures. I'll show you some other pictures that he found.
Because that picture, it's incredible.
Yeah. And he asked me at the time, well, you see, this is my baptism. We went everywhere. So because we found the youngest brother, not the youngest brother, the brother of my foster father who was still alive, he said, yes, he said, I know the church where she was baptized, but that church no longer is standing because the Germans burnt it down. And then they took all the books to another church. So we went to the other church, Jacques and I, and the woman there went through, the very thick books, and went through books and books and found me. And here I am, Maria Josefa, and in Latin it says, child abandoned child. I was an abandoned child, and that's how they registered me in April 21st of April. Doesn't say what year, as a question mark. So that's who I was. It's on the pages like this. This is me. It says, this is my foster mother, and that was my foster father, and that's me. So I looked it up actually. What does it mean? Puella exposita. I looked up on Google yesterday. What does it mean? And it means abandoned child.
And can I ask, Milli, what happened to your aunt?
My aunt, I'll tell you what happened to her. She's the only survivor, together with my mother, who survived the war. My mother came from Poland, I'm not sure when, sometime either during the 1920s or perhaps the early 30s, I don't know. And she took this one sister with her. My mother was the eldest, I think, of 9 or 10 children. This is what Dordrecht looked like. Dordrecht is a very pretty city, actually, very lovely. Now this is me in a what do you call that? The Catholics have what do you call them? So I was given some flowers and special dress, and I was part of I was 3 years old then. So this is also one of the during the war.
You look quite content, very happy.
Yeah, I think I was very happy with my foster parents. They were lovely. I mean...
You don't look sad or...
No, I don't think I was. I mean, I didn't know. I don't remember my mother or my father. I mean, to me, this was my family. I didn't know any better, did I? And they were lovely people. They took great care of me. So...
Such a lovely picture. And this is the original.
Yeah. They sent them to me. I think my foster parents once came to Roermond and left all these photos, and I wasn't there. I was in England, so I never saw them again. I think this is probably a copy. I think my daughter has the original.
That's the original. And here's a picture of your mom and your dad when they got engaged and on their wedding.
Well, I think so. I mean. This is their wedding, this is their... It's actually very sad because none of their family were there. Now this picture, see, my father, my real father, had 3 brothers, who had gone to live in England before the Second World War. And this picture is from a photo album of one of these uncles of mine, which my cousin found after his mother died. And so that's when I got it, which is... I don't know, 10, 20 years ago, I suppose. Before then, I had never ever seen a picture of my father.
And your mother didn't have a picture?
Well, I think she must have had, but I had a brother who took everything, and so I don't know what that was after my parents died. My brother lived in Israel, they were in Israel, I was in England, and my brother just took everything, and... So
and really, when you saw for the first time the picture of your father...
Well, I think, having known my uncles, but that's a different story. That's why I was actually sent to England, because after I finished school, my parents didn't know what to do with me. So they very kindly sent me to England, to London, to my family, whom I didn't really know, because...
That was your father's brother?
My father's brother, and I ended up living with one of his oldest brothers, Uncle Josso, who had actually survived Auschwitz, and his wife and children had been murdered in Auschwitz, but I didn't know that at the time because nobody told me. And his second wife was also an Auschwitz survivor, and she had been experimented upon and couldn't have any children. And I went to live with him, but my uncle, you'll laugh, was a Satmar Chassid. So I, coming from Roermond, from a very non-Jewish environment, although I had a very strictly Orthodox upbringing at home, but outside the home everybody was Roman Catholic. So to me I'm very lucky because I just adapt, I'm like a chameleon. Wherever I go, I just adapt to... I've sort of stopped doing that because, I wanted to become my own person eventually. So that's what happened to me, and so I met all these uncles that had come. There was Uncle Wolf, Uncle Schmiel, Uncle Schleume, and they were all very, very nice people, and I always think I'm like them and not like my mother, who was not very nice really. They were nice, kind, good people. They were all very religious. They were not all Satmar Hasidim except this one uncle. And suddenly I had cousins, but the problem with these cousins was that they had a totally different life, of course, to what I had had. They were all born in England and brought up in England, and I don't think they quite knew what to do with me, and I didn't know what to do with them. So I've never been really very close to any of my cousins. I mean, in the meantime, lots of them have died, of course, because they're all, my age, older. So that's all I know about my father's family. And he had 3 sisters, and the 3 sisters stayed in Czechoslovakia. Now it's in the Ukraine, where they came from. And the 3 sisters each had a husband and 4 children. And from them, 1 daughter survived, and she lives in London, and she's now 94. She's my cousin Suri, and she's very, very nice. I went to see her last year, and she's amazing. She looked at me and she said, "Oh yes," I said, "How are your children? How's Karen? How's Stephen? How's Jeremy?" She hadn't seen them for, I don't know, 40 years or thereabouts, but she still remembered. And she survived Auschwitz simply because she was in the line, you know, go left, go right, and a woman behind her gave her a nod in her back and said, "When they ask your age, tell them you're 15." And she was 13 at the time. And that's how she survived. And she told me years and years later that she actually met my mother in Bergen-Belsen. She'd heard there was a Mrs. Steinberg, which she knew, you know, it was her mother was a Steinberg. So she went to find my mother, and she found her. And my mother said, "Come back with me, come home to Holland, because there's nothing left from wherever you came from." And my cousin said, no, I'm going to London. And years later she told the story, because she knew she had, you know, her uncles, the brothers of her mother. And so she told me she was, I don't know how old she was by the time, perhaps 16, when she came out of, she had been moved from Auschwitz to Bergen-Belsen, and so they were liberated in Bergen-Belsen by the British and the Canadians. And so she said she and her future sister-in-law, that she didn't know was going to be her sister-in-law, but it was in fact her, she much later married the brother of this lady. They were together in Auschwitz, and they flew to London, I don't know how, to Croydon Airport. At that time it was Croydon Airport, and they got there. And I said, "Sorry, what did you do?" She said, "We phoned," and they only spoke Yiddish. "We phoned Uncle Wolf, and we said, 'I'm here, come and get us.'"
Amazing.
And she said it was very hard because she had nowhere to go, so she lived with his aunt and uncle for a while. And then she married the brother of her aunt by marriage. You know, they were not related, but my uncle had married Auntie Lane, and she married Auntie Lane's brother, Jack. And I remember him very, very well. They were a lovely couple. They had 2 daughters and loads of grandchildren. I don't know how many, a lot. Probably by now she has 100 great-grandchildren. And so that's how she survived. And yes, I think in recent years I've been looking them up in Yad Vashem, and so I knew that each of these sisters had 4 children, and that Suri was one of them, and the only survivor of all of them. And she told me that her father, my uncle, by marriage, had been one of these people that had to put the bodies into the oven, and he survived till the end, and then they killed him too, of course. Yeah, that was the story. But I have to say that Suri and Jack were not at all Holocaust survivors. You know, they were, obviously, because her husband was also in Auschwitz, and he survived by making pieces, chess pieces out of bits of wood for the whoever was in charge, and got extra bread, and that's how he survived. They never, you know, people say, oh, you know, the war has done this to you or that to you or the other. I don't believe that. I believe that everybody's born with their own character, and we all react in our own way. You can't say we're all Shoa survivors, so we're all the same, we're all this, that, and yeah. We're not. We're all different, and this is how. And I think my cousin and her husband lived a very normal life. Okay, they did remember their parents, because I asked Suri once, what was your life like in Karetsky, where they all came from. So it was very simple. They had like a very big house and a farm, and you know, they were self-sufficient. They had animals, and I remember my Satmar uncle Yossel loved animals. He used to feed all the cats that came in the garden, and because he grew up with animals, didn't know any better. And that's how they were. So, you know, I always say I come from a family which is not particularly educated, not particularly anything. They led very simple lives, and then they were displaced. You know, my mother came to Holland because there were pogroms, and this one sister she took with her, and all the others perished. Now, my aunt was hidden. My aunt looked totally un-Jewish. My mother looked quite Jewish, but this sister of hers did not. So she went into hiding and survived. And after the war, she married somebody from Poland that she knew, or she knew his family, and moved to Paris. And once a year we'd go to Paris and visit this aunt and uncle. They never had children for some reason. I think she had lots of miscarriages but never actually managed to give birth. And she was Tante Sanna, and she eventually left her husband because he was absolutely horrible too. And she ran away from Paris and went to Israel. And this is a very funny story. One year they came to us in London. You know, I was married by then, I had children. And so one Pesach they came and stayed with us for Pesach. And at the end of their stay, they left, and she thrust something into my hands. She says, look after it. Okay. So they left. So I looked what she'd given me. It was a tin of Johnson's baby powder. So I opened it up and it was full of money. I can't remember how much, but loads of money. So I took it to the bank and banked it. What am I supposed to do? Years later, she left her husband, and then she said, and she went to Israel. She literally left, didn't tell him she was going to leave. She just one day, she upped and left him and went to Israel. And then she said, send me the money. And she bought a little flat, and she lived quite near my mother, but they never got on because my mother was pretty horrible to her too, like she was to everybody. And so she lived very happily in Israel for the rest of her life, but the rest is a different story. So that was the story of her money. Look after it for me. You know. She said this is money she'd had from the Germans, and her husband knew, and he'd always been looking for it, but she hid it in a tin of talcum powder.
It's amazing.
Funny, isn't it?
Milli, did she ever tell you about that she followed where you were?
No. She never told me, but this younger sister that I found in Roermond, she told me about it. And they were very worried because they thought, you know, if this aunt, who's obviously Jewish, and she knows where I am, it's not safe, because they knew, the less they knew, the better it was for everybody concerned. Because if they were interrogated, they didn't know anything.
So
I was a baby that was on the doorstep.
Why do you think she didn't tell you after the
Why
war?
did she not tell me after the war? I don't know, because we never talked about the war. But this aunt of mine was a very, very kind, sweet person. And I think she loved me more than my mother loved me, actually. But she never mentioned it. They went to Paris. What did I know? I never saw her, you know. Saw her once a year as I was growing up. And I didn't know much about her. I knew she was married to Uncle Ella, and I knew that he was not a very nice person. And she never actually got divorced officially. She just upped and left, and was very, very happy in Bat Galim. She had lots of friends. She went to the beach every day in the summer, and she was happy. And she said one day he followed her and he knocked on the door, and she just didn't open the door. She said, I'm not home, go away. That was the end of that. She did tell me that, which I thought was quite funny at the time. And once, you know, whenever we used to stay in Haifa with my parents, my mother, after the first day or so, turned really horrible, as usual. And one day I remember running away from my mother to this aunt who lived sort of across the railway, and I said to her, why is my mother always so horrible to me? I said, is that because of the war? And she said, no, your mother's always been like that. Nothing to do. See, which, you don't grow horrible because of the war or anything else. This is how she was. I don't know why. It's her character. And
Milli, can I ask, your mother went into hiding?
Yes,
with your
my mother
brother?
went into hiding. And I actually printed the story yesterday, which is this, which I only discovered about a year ago. Last year was one of my granddaughter's bat mitzvah, and they live in London. There's my youngest son. Those are his 3 kids when they were very little. I mean, they're older now. And I said, as a bat mitzvah present, I'm going to take you to the Netherlands for 3 days, or however long you can go, and I'll show you my past, which we did. So I took my youngest son and his eldest daughter, Dana, and we went to Holland. And just before then, Karen had been approached as my daughter on Facebook. He had discovered that Karen is my daughter, and he knew about me and my mother. My mother had been hidden with his grandparents, And when I said I was coming to Holland, he said, I'd love to meet you. He's a very nice guy, Gerrit is his name. And he just desperately wanted to meet me. And he also told me stories about my mother, and nobody really liked her, which was unfortunately. And they were betrayed. So my mother was hidden on this farm by the Dutch police, who were very happy to collaborate with the Germans most of the time.
And is that why she landed up in...
And that's why she landed up in Westerbork and Ravensbrück. Now, the story was...
And in
that
Bergen-Belsen, eventually...
Pardon?
Eventually she was in Bergen-Belsen.
She was, yeah, they were all... That's like Bori and all the other... her family and Gaya's family, they were all together, Westerbork, Ravensbrück, Bergen-Belsen. I remember Naomi telling me one day that she remembered when the British came with a white flag and her mother told my mother, look, they're coming with white flags, and my mother said, white flags, black flags, what's the difference, who cares, you know, this is how my mother was. But they were liberated. So Naomi told me a lot about my mother, how... I said, Naomi, what did my mother do in Ravensbrück? What did your mother do? They worked for Siemens. They were, you know, slave laborers or whatever. I don't know how my mother, or what my mother did, because she had very, very poor eyesight. But whatever, she survived. My mother was a survivor, I think, by nature.
So your mother was close with the Laufers and the Moskowitz family?
Well, the funny thing about that is that when I got married in Roermond in 1961, I insisted I didn't want to get married in London, I wanted to get married for my home. Cousin Moskowitz was doing my chuppah, and I never asked why. I mean, you know, everything I told you in that story, I was like a package, you know, like a parcel. Put here, put there, do this, do that. It was all done unto me. The wedding was organized by my parents. I had no input into it whatsoever. And Cousin Moskowitz came, and Rabbi Berlinger, who was the chief rabbi of that area. And years and years and years and years later, I come and live in Netanya 6 years ago, 6.5 years ago, and I meet Chaya. And she looks at me and she says, I think I know you, you're Milli. I said, yes. I said, I don't remember you from anywhere. She said, yes, I think we met once in a Bnei Akiva camp. I said, could be. I don't think I don't know. Anyway, I said, what was your maiden name? She said, Moskowitz. She said, was your father Chazan Moskowitz? She said, yes. So I said, well, it's funny because your father was at my chuppah. Oh. So we came to talk, and then I met her older sister, Naomi, who said, yes, of course, your family and my family were together in da-da-da-da-da-da. And that's how she said that Naomi very often spoke, her mother spoke about my mother during they were growing up, and that's how she remembers. And that's how I came to know Chaya, and I'm friends with her. Which is very strange, really, how to meet people like that. Now,
after all the years,
with all the years in between. She came to live in Israel long time ago, and she married an Israeli. She's still married to him. He's still alive. Naomi's husband died in the meantime. And Chaya also said, you know, her father said after the war, right, this is what happened, end of, we're now going back to being a normal family. And so they were, and I suppose the Laufers were too. I don't really know where the Laufers were from, but I know they were Hungarian, because I remember my mother was saying, oh, those Hungarian women with their scheitels, you know. The Hungarian women even then apparently wore scheitels. And my uncle Wolf in London was married to Auntie Lana, who was also Hungarian, and her sister Esther. They're all very Hungarian, and my cousin Suri, you know, the sole one that survived Auschwitz. They were all very blonde, blue-eyed. My father was blue-eyed, I know that. My middle son is blue-eyed, the only one. And they were very Hungarian, and my mother was Polish, and they didn't like her because they looked down, you know, she's just Polish, she wasn't one of them. That is how I experience it. But they had great respect for my stepfather, who was also Polish, but he was from Warsaw. And he was very worldly and very different to my mother. But, you know, it was a second marriage for both of them, and they made the best of it, I suppose. And my stepfather died when he was 91 in his own bed, very nicely. And then my mother died, I think, about 4 years after him. And she was a lot younger than he was, too. But that's the only father I remember. I don't remember. So I had 3 fathers. I had my real biological father, whom I never knew. Then I had my foster father, and then I had my stepfather.
And your father, your biological father, he was
deported. I think he must have been picked up off the street, I'm not sure, in 1942, October. And he was dead. They're not sure. They think it was either November or it may have been February the following year. And he was killed by Dr. Mengele in person. We don't know why, but there had been witnesses. I don't know why. And he was 37, I think, at the time.
And there were witnesses. That's why your mother could remarry.
Yeah.
She wasn't
That's
allowed
why
to.
And then I think after the war, and I think my mother only went and got me back in 1946 because I have papers which say, you know, that my registration was false, that I wasn't really Marjootje Hofstee or Maria Josefa Hofstee, but I was really born as Amalia Steinberg on the 1st of January in The Hague. Sort of crossed out, it said falsified in Dutch, vervalscht, SCH in those days. And that is dated August 1946, so I presume that's... My mother couldn't find me, she didn't know where I was, because the family I was with had moved from one address to another, and I'm not even sure that she knew the original address. So the Red Cross actually found me eventually.
And do you have any recollections when your mother came to fetch you?
No. I do remember moving to Roermond. I was 5 when my mother remarried. She remarried in 1947.
But they say when she came to collect you, you were screaming and you were...
No, I don't remember that at all. No. The only thing I remembered when we went back to the house where I was hidden, I actually went back with my granddaughter and my son last year to the original house where I had been put on the doorsteps. I didn't recognize that either. Nice old house. Dordrecht is the oldest city in the Netherlands.
Was it very emotional going back?
No, because I don't remember any of it. It was just... And then the guy that actually wrote my story about Dordrecht took me to the house, took me and my son and my daughter his daughter to the actual house where we lived, the second. And I remembered when I went there with Jacques, who dragged me everywhere to find out what happened to me, that I remembered that the house that I lived in, that when you opened the front door, there were stairs going straight up. There was no hall. You just opened the front door and it was perhaps, this much, and then there was stairs going up. So when we went there was one of the houses, the front door was open, so we looked in, and indeed there was a staircase. And that's the only thing I remember. And I remember sitting at the top of the staircase, and there were dogs barking and running above my head on the roof, and I think there must have been Germans, but that's all I remember. So that's my only memory. I don't recognize them, I mean.
But they knew you were Jewish?
Yes. So yes, this Wim knew, he says in his letter, but I always knew you were a Jewish girl, but I never told anybody. And he was about 9 at the time.
But they endangered their lives by keeping you.
Yeah, of course, they would have been killed.
Yeah.
So this story, my mother's story, was so they were hidden on this farm, and the couple, he was Marinus Post, and Marinus Post was a very, very famous Dutch resistance fighter, and they were all caught, and they had 8 children. This is what their grandson told me. And when the Dutch police came to arrest them or whatever, his grandmother pretended that my brother was also one of her children to protect him. And the police said, nah, can't you see he's a Jew boy? And so he went with my mother, and there were other Jews hidden at the same time, which I didn't know, but none of them survived except my mother and my brother. And so they were taken to, I think, the local, I don't know, and they were taken to Westerbork, and from there to Ravensbrück, and from there eventually towards the end of the war to Bergen-Belsen. But they were a long time in Ravensbrück, which was not a you know, don't think they had gas chambers there, but Bory says there were. But I looked it up. There were some camps not far away that did have gas chambers, but not Ravensbrück itself. It was a women's camp. There were lots of gypsy women there. That my mother, once I heard her say to somebody, there were lots of gypsy women and they were very nice to them. But then, apart from that, she never ever talked about her time there, except, and this has gone down in the family, that we were never ever allowed to have kohlrabi, because all they got to eat in Ravensbrück was kohlrabi, and I didn't know what kohlrabi looked like, but we never had kohlrabi at home. And when I was still living in Tel Aviv, and I lived quite close to the Carmel market, and I used to go to the same little man to buy my vegetables. One day he was trying to sell me kohlrabi. And I said, no, my mother was in Bergen-Belsen, no kohlrabi. And he never offered it to me again. And he was a little Sephardi, I don't know where he was from. I went to see him the other day. Karen and I, my daughter and I, went to Tel Aviv a few weeks ago. And I said to Karen, after 7 years, I want to go back to this guy, see if he still recognizes me. And I walked there. And he said, I was just thinking of you. And I said, why? Why were you thinking? He said, I don't know. I was thinking about England and this and that. And he said, how's your friend? I said, I'm afraid he's, he passed away. So that was quite funny. So we don't have kohlrabi, nor do my children have kohlrabi, as far as I know, and certainly not my grandchildren. And that's the only thing I know about
and
Ravensbrück.
Your brother, did he ever talk to you about his experiences?
Well, like Sosha said, didn't want to talk about Sui, I don't want to talk about my brother. My brother is a different case. I call him a professional Shoa survivor. Everything that happened to him after was my fault and a Shoa. And he and I did not see eye to eye and don't want to talk about it. He died, I don't know when. His family saw fit not to tell me that he died. I heard from a third party who rang me and said, she said, I think you should know, but your brother died, and his family never told me about it.
It's so sad.
And in a way, I think my mother had a lot to account for, but I suppose she did what she did for some reason, I don't know. So I think, my brother was with my mother at all times, except he was actually hidden with her parents, my so-called grandparents, for a very short time. But he was 5 and he talked too much. And this younger sister that I met eventually in 1 month told me that she was 16 and she took him for a walk one day outside, and he saw a German soldier, and he said very loudly to her, Tante Hans, is this, we had, there was a nickname for the Germans in Dutch, Moffen, they call them. He says, is that a moth? And Tante Hans got very worried, and she said she went to stand in front of a shop window and she stood behind him so she wasn't seen. And then she waited till the soldier had passed, and then she took him home, and then she told her parents what had happened. And her parents said, look, he's not safe here, it's not safe for us, not safe for him. So they arranged for him a different hiding place on a farm somewhere in the country. And when my mother went into hiding, she took him away from there. She should have left him there, it would have been much better. And she took him away from there and took him to this place where they were betrayed eventually. And that was all my fault, because according to my brother's view, they sent him away because they wanted me, which is total utter nonsense, because I'm not even sure that they knew I was his sister. And I was much younger. I was 5 years younger. I was a baby, and but that stayed with him all his life, and he persecuted me, and that was my fault that he ended up in Bergen-Belsen, and my fault this, and everything was my fault. And my mother had a lot to account for, because what she did was, after the war, when she got me back, she told me once, I was a very difficult child. I cried day and night. Well, I mean, wouldn't I? Well,
that's natural.
What did I know? You know, I was taken away from my mummy, my daddy, what did I know? And because I was a difficult child, she went to complain to her GP, and the GP said, well, Mrs. Steinberg, she needs you. You know, be nice to her, cuddle her. I don't know what he said, something like that. And so she sent my brother away to an orphanage, because she said she couldn't cope with the both of us. And my brother was then, I don't know, if I was 4, he was 9, I suppose. So she sent him to this orphanage, and he stayed there. And when she got remarried, my stepfather didn't want him. He only wanted me. He was willing to accept me, but not him. So he stayed and I never saw him. I didn't know, I didn't know my brother. We didn't grow up together. And he stayed there. And when he was 13, the whole orphanage went on Aliyah. And he went with them. And when I was 11, I got acute appendicitis, and my mother had gone to Israel to visit my brother, whom she hadn't seen for many years, but I stayed behind with my stepfather, and I got acute appendicitis. I was 11, and my mother rushed back from Israel because my stepfather said, I can't sign anything because I'm not her father. And so I had a operation. I was fine after that. And shortly after that, my mother brought my brother home because she wasn't happy with his education, and there was not enough to eat, and da-da-da-da-da. And I didn't know my brother, so he lived with us for a very short time, and it was terrible, terrible, because my stepfather hated him.
Wait, this is so
And
sad.
my mother was in the middle of it all, so he was sent away again. He was sent to Amsterdam, and I never, I never saw him really, and I didn't really know him until in '67 he went back to Israel after the 6-day war. And again, I didn't see him because I was living in England and he was living in Israel. I think he came for the Brit Milah of my middle child, my son Stephen. It was round about Pesach. He came too late. He came 2 weeks after the Brit. For some reason, I don't know why he came. I didn't ask him to, and he was just horrible. But anyway, I put up with it all. And eventually, he got married very late in life. I think he was 40. His eldest son is, I think, a year younger than my youngest son. And my daughter is 61, and my next one is 58, and Jeremy is... Oh no, I think Stephen is 50. No, will be 59 in April, and Jeremy's 48 is my baby. And I had very little contact with my brother. However, when my stepfather died, he claimed that we should have half of the whatever, and I said no, because we were not his children. We were never adopted legally or anything. And I said, my mother will inherit. Anyway, I don't know what happened. My mother inherited whatever it was. 4 years later, my mother died, and then my brother tried very hard. And my mother had left a very straightforward will, half-half, and my brother just... And then he dragged me through the courts in Israel for 22 years until we had a very wise lady judge. Eventually, he put a stop to it. So my brother is not exactly my favorite person.
So he was very damaged from the war.
He was very damaged, but a lot of people were very damaged. I was also very damaged, but I didn't behave like that. Yeah. That's why I'm saying that we're all born with a character.
Milli, can I just ask, because you were sent after, when you were reunited with your mother, you went to I think it was a Roman Catholic school and then a Protestant school.
I went to, yes, I was sent to, you see, where I grew up in Vermont, it was actually the bishop's seat for the whole area, and 99% of the people were Roman Catholic and the other percent was Protestant, and then there were like 5 Jews or something. They were all broken families, you know, half families, quarter families, like my family, me, my mother, and my stepfather. I was the only child my age, Jewish child. So I think my stepfather, in his wisdom, thought that the Protestants were the least of the 2 evils. That's how I have interpreted it later in life, and sent me to a Protestant primary school. And after that they sent me to on the advice of the headmaster of my school, to this Roman Catholic convent school, which I hated the nuns, I hated everything about it. It was much below my intellect, I think. I'm not particularly clever, but that was, you know, really. So from there they sent me to a grammar school which was non-denominational, it was nothing. And when I was 15, I think, or 16, they sent me to Amsterdam to a Jewish school. And I just lived there with a family. And that's how I know the IJzermans, because the lady of this couple, she was a sister to Mr. IJzerman, to Mrs. IJzerman.
And were you happy in Amsterdam?
And Sasha married, you know, the eldest son, Gershon. Was I happy there?
Did you make friends?
No. Well, I did make friends, but it was very difficult because I had to go home every weekend, and it was like a 2.5-hour journey by train. So there wasn't really, you know, there wasn't really time for socializing very much. And when I was living before Amsterdam, I wasn't allowed to have any friends because they were all non-Jews and they were all no good. So I think, I'm told that I'm very good at being alone now. I don't like being alone, but you know, één brera, I am alone.
Exactly.
Probably because I had a very lonely childhood. I was alone. You know, I didn't have many friends, or if any. I was friends with the girl next door, that was okay. I stayed friends until she died.
A Jewish girl? Or?
No, there weren't any Jews. I only had non-Jewish schools and non-Jewish friends.
You got on?
No.
With this friend, you were very friendly. You
well, I was always the only Jewish child in school, you know, and
were you ever picked on? Was there ever
anti-Semitism? No. We in those days in Holland we had Wednesday half-day school and Saturday half-day school, but of course I never went to school on Saturday, and so I just never went to school. I remember a teacher saying, in the primary school, I must have been 9, 10, I don't know, because it was till 12, and then from 12 he went to the next lot, saying, you people, you butter your bread on both sides. And I didn't know what he meant, I don't think, but it didn't sound right somehow. So I went home and told my mother what he'd said. You know, meneer, I forget his name, said, blah, blah, blah. So my mother went to the school and said to him, meneer, whatever his name was, I'm grateful that I can butter my bread on one side. And he was dismissed because it was obviously a very anti-Semitic remark, you know, you Jews, butter your bread on both sides. I mean, what kind? And then later on, when I was in this horrible convent school, we had one male teacher, and he was the singing teacher, and we had to sing. And I remember that we always sang German songs, only German songs. So eventually I stopped singing. I don't know why, because to me it didn't seem right that we... And I understood German very well because my parents spoke Yiddish, and also I started learning German in school. So I stopped singing, and one of the teachers noticed that I stopped singing, and I was called, you know, and why don't you sing? And I said, because we're always singing German songs. Why would I? I don't want to sing German songs. So from then on we sang also Dutch songs, English songs, different songs. And that's all I remember from that convent school, and the nuns whom I didn't like. There was Sister Theophilia who taught German, and all these sisters, they were just, I didn't like any of them. So after that I went to this very nice non-denominational grammar school, and I was happy there. I had friends and I did very well, and my best subject was Dutch, strangely enough, and the teacher said you should go to university, and I'd always wanted to become a journalist, but of course never happened. And then suddenly, in the middle of it all, I was sent to Amsterdam to a Jewish grammar school, and I did not do well there at all.
And the family that took you in, were they kind to you? Were they nice to you?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really know why they sent me there to this day. I think it was my brother's advice, from what I gathered later on, to send me to a Jewish school. And it was difficult because, socially I didn't really fit in, because I came from what the Jews in Amsterdam called the platteland. I don't know what you say. Platteland. I was, a peasant sort of thing, because I came from the platteland, from Roermond. And the Amsterdam.
It's like the countryside.
Yeah, it was the countryside. I was, peasant. And it was hard. And I did have a best friend. I don't know, I mean... And then they sent me to England from there.
When you were sent to England, were you upset with your mother that she sent you away?
No, I just accepted everything. I told you I was like a parcel. One day they decided to send me to here, and then one day they sent me to there. This is what my granddaughter wrote in the play, about me. I was a parcel. I never questioned anything.
Did you know any English before you went to England?
Did I know English? Yes, I had done 5 years English at school. We did French, English, German.
And did you know which family you were going to, or?
No, I knew it was family of my father's, whom I had known. I didn't know anything about them. And I remember one summer I had actually been to London before, when I was about 13. They had sent me to my uncle's. And their eldest daughter was slightly younger than me. I think she was born in 44 during the war in London. And they sent me and this cousin and another cousin on her mother's side, who wasn't my cousin. We were all sent to a Beis Yaakov summer camp. I hated it so much. All I remember from that summer camp was that it was housed in a ballet school, and obviously the pupils were away because it was summer. And I loved ballet. I've always loved ballet, and I used to stand and look at all the photographs, and I used to be pulled, mustn't look at them. And then it was a very hot summer, and one day we were allowed to go swimming. We went, and I was always a very keen swimmer, so we walked for miles to the swimming pool. And when we got there, they discovered it was mixed, so we had to walk all the way back, and we never got to swim. But around the school was a river, and I used to see people swim in a river, but of course we were never allowed to do that. That's my great memories of Beis Yaakov. I mean, send me to Beis Yaakov of all people. I mean, I had a friend in London whom I once told, my uncle was a Satmar Chassid, and he laughed so much. He said, "You, Satmar Chassid?" I said, "Well, I can't help it. He was. I'm not, obviously."
And when you went to stay with your uncle,
they were very nice to me.
Which school did you go to?
No, by then I was 18. I finished school. I did a secretarial course. I was sent to college to become a secretary, and then I got married. I never worked. Do you know, I never worked till I was, I don't know, in my 30s, I think.
And in which area of London was your uncle living?
To which?
Which suburb in London did they stay, your uncle? In which part of London?
Oh, in Stamford Hill.
So you spent time in Stamford Hill, which is very Hasidic.
Yeah. I went from Roermond to Amsterdam to Stamford Hill.
And did you go to shul?
I did go to shul. I remember one, I think it must have been Rosh Hashanah or some Chag, and I thought it was very strange. When I was the Yizkor, everybody walked out. I'd never seen that before, because in Roermond there was a shul, but it was, there was never a minyan, except on Chagim. My stepfather would import all sort of people to make up a minyan, and of course nobody left for Yizkor because nobody had parents or whatever. And here in London everybody had parents, so they walked out for Yizkor, and I thought where they were going. I thought that was very strange, and I don't remember going to shul because I got married quite short, not long after that. I think I got to London in August 1960, and I think in May or June 61 I got engaged. Then I had to go back to Holland. I never saw my husband again except once in between, and then in November I got married. So there wasn't any time for anything really. And I show you why I married, not because I was madly in love with him, far from it. But this was my status, and I have now lost it.
You never had a passport or?
No, I was stateless. I had a pink paper passport, and I had things. I had to go and register with the police every year in Roermond, because I was stateless. When I was in Roermond last year with my youngest son and his daughter, I went to Roermond, and the guy who led us around, who wrote my story in that book, and he said, he took me to the town hall to the registration, and I was registered as I think originally it said unknown or something, onbekend, and then it said Czechoslovakian, which my father had been. So this is what I got in England when I got to England. Look. But look what it says. Look what it says about nationality. Is it on that page?
Yeah.
Yeah, what does it say?
It's uncertain.
Yeah.
It's amazing, sure.
I was uncertain.
And this is a travel document, and it was issued in the 28th of November.
It's a certificate of registration to the foreign police or the foreign whatever it was. I don't know, who's it issued by there? You must produce this certificate if required to do so by any police officer or immigration officer. Nice, isn't it?
It's incredible. And this is such a lovely book. I'm just going to go. This is a
yes.
book.
So this is my story of my time in Roermond, where I grew up. I just want to see, because my daughter sent me a WhatsApp earlier. I don't know what she wants now.
And are you in touch with the author of this?
Yes. She says, good luck with your interview. I sent her a picture last night of the table. Look, all these.
This is so special.
Pardon?
This is really nice what he did.
Yeah, this in fact is the advertisement that the police put in the paper the next day. It says, een vondelinge, an abandoned child.
And that was 9th of January 1943.
So that was me. When I actually discovered, when Jacques took me to Dordrecht to find out what actually happened to me, and nobody could find anything, and we went to the town hall, and there was a woman there who went to look and look and look, and she came back and she said, I can't find anything. And then she said, there's one place I haven't looked. And she went back to the back, and then she came back and she found this thing that says that's falsified, that I really wasn't Maria Josefa, but that I was Amalia Steinberg. And then I discovered that I had been an abandoned child, and I started crying. And I don't know why, because obviously I wasn't really abandoned, but that's how it came over. And then the funny thing is that we went to this church where I had been baptized, and a woman, when she found me, she started writing on a card or something, and she said, I suppose you want to get married and you need proof. And I said, I'm not Catholic, I'm Jewish.
Oh, this is amazing, the amount of research that went into this.
That's how I got all this stuff, you see, because they did all the research. I didn't have to.
And here they have a picture with you and your mother.
Yeah, that's me in some Hanukkah party, I think.
And the person who wrote this article...
Yes, he came and took us round Roermond when I came there with my granddaughter, my son, last year, which was very nice.
And Millie, this picture over here...
Those were my grandparents. They came to my wedding, not my foster parents. Here they are. But the funny thing is that I thought they were my foster grandparents, but the aunts that I found in Roermond eventually said no, their mother had died and their father remarried the housekeeper, and they were all very, very angry with him and never wanted to see them again because they thought it was beneath, beneath their dignity.
This is an incredible article that was written.
Yeah, nice, isn't it? Shame it's all in Dutch.
So maybe one should have it translated.
Yeah, I suppose one could.
And this is done now. It's 2000. Well, last year.
That was last. Yeah, there is a picture. Look, of me receiving the book, I think, and there's a date on it. Is there a date?
13th of December.
That's when I met the mayor, and it's another very funny story about the mayor.
And Millie, can you speak a little bit about this evening where you were presented with the book?
Yes, well, it was an afternoon, I think.
Afternoon.
And my daughter came with me. I had asked her to come, and also Jacques' nephew, who lived not far from Roermond, so we all went to Roermond, and we're sitting in the front row. And so this man who is the head of this organization, I forget what it's called, this is an annual book. It comes out, it says Mirror of Roermond, right? Yeah. And he introduced my story. Everybody introduced, there are lots of other stories, not war stories, different stories or history of Roermond. And he introduces, you can see there's the pictures from inside the article. And so at the end of it, some bloke came to the front and started talking. And I don't know why I recognized him, because he had been quite infamous in the Netherlands for some personal thing. He had been the mayor of Maastricht. Do you know where Maastricht is? Maastricht is a city in the Netherlands, not far from Roermond, and he was mayor. And he is gay, and he was married, and he's still married to the same guy. And there was a scandal about him being caught with a young man in one of the hotels in Maastricht. So he resigned, and later he became mayor of this town, right? So he goes to the front and he starts talking. So I said to Vincent, "Isn't that on a horse?" "Yes," he says, "he's the mayor." I thought, "Oh, I didn't know." Anyway, after the ceremony, this Honorhoes comes over to me and starts talking. And this is happens a lot in the Netherlands. He discovered that he had a Jewish mother, and he considers himself Jewish. And so obviously he wanted to talk to me because I'm Jewish. So we had a nice chat, and then so I thought, yeah, okay. So I went home, and then the following year we sort of kept in touch, via email and what have you. And then the following year I said, "I'm coming to Roermond, do you want to meet me again, blah, blah, blah." And he arranged a lovely meeting in the town hall for my son and my granddaughter, and he had coffee and tea and cake and all the rest of it, and all the other important people in Vermont, and we had a lovely couple of hours with him. And then he said, I sometimes come to Israel because I'm trying to find my mother's family, my Jewish family. His father was Catholic. I said, well, do you stay in touch with your father's family? He said, no, they're just boring Catholics. So we've been in touch with him all this time. I still am in touch with him. So he came to Israel, and he came to us Friday night dinner at my daughter's, and afterwards he said to Karen, do you do this every Friday night? And Karen said, yes, sometimes at my mother, sometimes here, and he was very impressed. And he actually told me a few weeks ago he's coming again to Israel soon. So so I told all of Jacques' family back there, I'm friends with the mayor of Vermont, who happens to be, who is Jewish, who wants to be Jewish and is Jewish and acknowledges that. And
it's from the mother's side.
On his mother's side. And I said, did your mother ever talk about it? He said no. And I have come across other Dutch people like that who after the war were very scared to be Jewish and just denied being Jewish and had nothing to do with it. And his mother, I've met other people like that. So we're friends.
Milli, this is amazing. This is a magazine that comes out monthly.
I tell you what about this. One day I got an email from a man called Tasselaar, somewhere in the Netherlands, I think Alkmaar, I'm not sure. And meneer Tasselaar asked me, does this name ring a bell with you? And he mentioned a name, and the name was Bastiaan Schmidt. So her married name is Bastiaan and her maiden name is Schmidt, which is very German, from Scheveningen. Now I know that my parents lived in Scheveningen after they got married, which is just outside The Hague. And I said, no, means nothing to me. And he said, since I'm retired, he was a retired dentist, my children said to me, Dad, you must have a hobby, otherwise you'll be terribly bored. And he took it upon himself. The Second World War became his hobby. And one day he found this document. It was sent to him by somebody. I must show it to you because it's really the weirdest document I've ever seen and he had ever seen. He said he'd never seen anything like it and never again. And now I've lost it. Oh, here it is. And this is the document which after the story came out he actually sent to me. And I think it's a copy. Part 1, Part 2. This man went to Ravensbrück because of this document. I don't know how good your German is. How good is your German?
From Yiddish a little bit.
All right. Well, I'll read it to you.
Okay.
I'll tell you what it is. It's this document. He said it's a document from this is from a post office in Scheveningen, the Stevenstraat. Now I remember the Stevenstraat because we used to go there on holiday sometimes. And this woman, Bastiaan Schmidt, sent my mother in July 1944, she sent my mother a money order for 30 Reichsmarks to Ravensbrück, to my mother in Ravensbrück. And then she didn't hear anything back. Well, surprise, surprise. She then went to her local post office to inquire that this woman, that Mrs. Heimer get the money. Well, of course, Mrs. Heimer never got the money. So the post office inquired in the Ravensbrück, the Lager Ravensbrück, on the 29th of December 44, And it says that in Oom de Nachfragenschreiber angefragte Postanweisung, Aufgebot Scheveningen, it came from Scheveningen. The date of sending was the 3rd of July 1944 by Mrs. Bastiaan Schmidt from Scheveningen, and the amount was 30 Reichsmark, and the empfänger, that was my mother, the recipient, Steinberg Liebe number 28077. Is here on the 21st of July 44. Is the money has arrived, and it was signed by an Obersturmführer, who actually probably put the money in his own, an SS Obersturmführer, right? So my mother never mentioned this, and I doubt that she ever got the money. Obviously she never got the money. So this is the document this man found, and he was so impressed, and he couldn't believe it, that, you know, it's unique. There's never been anything like it. And so he contacted me, and he then wrote the story of our family, which is all in Dutch again. Sorry. It was then a lot of money, you know. 30 Reichsmark was 22 gulden 61. Yeah, for Fraulein Steinberg, Frauenkonzentrationslager Ravensbrück, Fürstenberg. That's the full address.
And what was the connection with your mother and this lady?
I don't know. I think Stevenstraat, she may have been my mother's landlady, she may have been a neighbor, she may also have been the lady that took in my mother's belongings and never gave them back to her after the war.
She never got them back.
And if my mother came back and said, yeah, but I paid for them, you know, I sent you 30 Reichsmark, but I don't know, this is what I surmise, we'll never know. I recognize the address, the Stevenstraat, Scheveningen, which rings a bell, but the name does not ring a bell. And this is this is the first address of my parents, I think. Yes, the Andreas Amtstraat 9, The Hague. And my father was a merchant, it says, Schulen, and he was married to Steinberg Baumfeld. And we had 2 children. There we go. My brother, who was born in 37, and me, who was born in 42. That's, you know, some archive thing. I've got loads of these from all these people that wrote all the stories.
All this research. It's incredible.
They did all the research. Without them, I never would have known anything. I'll tell you why I was called Maria Josefa, which is, you know, why am I called Maria Josefa? Apparently, the sister that brought me from the hospital, The Hague, to Dordrecht, who was also devoutly Roman Catholic, prayed all the way on the train to Maria and Josefa that we should arrive safely, which we did, and that's why they called me Maria Josefa, after the mother of Jesus and the father of Jesus.
The Hail Marys.
Yeah, they were Hail Marys and all that sort of thing on the way, and it worked somehow.
Really,
Power of prayer.
What an amazing, incredible story.
Well, I don't think it is. It's just another Shoa story, you know.
Milli, can I ask?
So many of them.
When your children were growing up, were you open with them about your
No,
your life?
Because my ex-husband never mentioned it, and I think I tried very, very hard to become British and part of whatever being British meant. It was only years later that I realized I never succeeded. But when I lived in England, and eventually I went to work against my husband's, he wouldn't let me go to work, but I did anyway eventually. And people would ask me, you know, they would detect a slight accent sometimes, and they would say, where are you from? And I said, Holland, Netherlands. Do you feel more Dutch or more English? And I would always say, neither. I'm Jewish. That is my identity. And that's how this is how I feel. I am neither Dutch nor English. I don't like the Dutch very much. Today's Dutch, they haven't changed. since the war with Hamas, I have actually stopped watching the BBC because it's just too awful for words. The Dutch news is not a lot better. The only ones who are nice are the Germans, the German news, because I get all of this via the internet, via a Dutch thing. I get it all here. Yeah, that's my identity. I'm Jewish. I'm neither British nor Dutch. I mean, luckily I have British nationality and not a Dutch, because I'm also Israeli. The Dutch don't allow dual nationality, but the British do. So I'm both British and Israeli. That suits me fine. And for a while I was part of the EU, but no longer since Brexit. Well, now I'm just British again, which doesn't bother me.
When did you first tell your children?
I started, I tell you, I never told my children, but when Karen was 16, my eldest, she went on Hachshara with Bnei Akiva to Israel. And one of the things they did was there was a visit to Yad Vashem. And when she came back, Karen told me, "Mum, I walked out. I couldn't take it." And all my British friends stayed inside. And I said, "Why?" She said, "I don't know. I just couldn't take it, Mum." So then I think I probably began to tell her a bit. And I think after I left her father, and I have to admit that none of the children liked their father very much, which is not surprising, but he died, I think, around 2000 or sure, I'm not sure. Then Jacques came into the picture, and they all loved Jacques, and it was Jacques that did all this. Then they began to know more about me.
So it was much later on in their lives.
No, it was just... I was together with Jacques, we were together 33 years. So this is 33 years ago when he started digging for me and discovered all this. I mean, we discovered it together, obviously, but he dragged me to everywhere.
And Milli, I have to ask you a very difficult question,
yes,
if you don't mind. This family that saved you, which is incredible because they knew you were Jewish and they endangered their lives. It's a very, very hard question, and it's something that I don't know if you've ever thought about, but if the tables were turned with you, what would you do in their situation?
What would I do? Yes, it is. I've been asked that question before.
It's a
would I take in... It's a very difficult question because it depends on the circumstances. Here was a couple who were devoutly Roman Catholic, and as the aunt writes, we were brought up to love our neighbor, and so this is what we did in not just in theory but in practice.
And they never had children as well.
And they never had any children of their own, and I think they would have been very happy if my mother hadn't come back, but of course I don't know that. They say that they would give me back. They always say that they would have given me back to my real mother, which a lot of these people didn't want to, but they did, and they gave me back. What would I do in these circumstances? I don't know. It's the very, being Jewish is unique, and the circumstances were unique. I honestly don't know the answer. Would I take in a Roman Catholic because they were being persecuted? It's very theoretical. I mean, it's only the Jews that have been persecuted like this over the centuries. It's no other people have been persecuted the way we have been persecuted just for being Jewish, that's all. Not because we have 3 horns growing out of our heads or anything else, just because we're Jewish. So it's a very difficult question. I don't know.
Milli, I just want to tell you, I am so incredibly grateful to you. This has been such an honor and a privilege, it really has, and I think you really are the youngest survivor that I've ever met. You don't look like a survivor, but you look amazing. No, but Milli, you really are, and you've been through such trauma, and you're smiling, and I think you've made such an incredible success of your life, and you should just have mazel and bracha, and at may Vestrim till 120 good health and happiness, which you so deserve.
Thank you.
I am so grateful to you.